You are operating with a belief that abundance is unlocked by a single hidden mechanism. But in reality, what shapes financial outcomes is far more grounded and consistent than that. When people feel stuck financially, it's usually not because they are missing a secret word or hidden code. It's because their habits, decisions, environment, and emotional stress are reinforcing the same cycle over and over again. There is a long tradition of spiritual language within Jewish mysticism, including interpretations of Hebrew letters, sacred names, and symbolic meanings. In those traditions, Hebrew is often described as deeply layered, where letters and sounds carry symbolic significance beyond everyday communication. But even within those teachings, the emphasis is generally on discipline, awareness, ethical living, and inner alignment, not instant material outcomes triggered by repeating a phrase.
The idea that a specific word can reliably produce money within 48 hours is not supported by historical or religious scholarship in any verifiable way. What does consistently affect someone's financial situation, however, is attention, behavior, and decision-making patterns. When someone becomes more focused, confident, and intentional, they often start noticing opportunities they previously overlooked and take actions they were too uncertain to take before. Stories about sudden financial turnarounds often feel dramatic because people naturally remember the breakthrough moments and forget the longer chain of preparation, timing, and existing opportunities that made those moments possible. A job offer, a client, or unexpected money usually connects back to prior networks, past effort, or simple probability, not a sudden external force triggered by a spoken phrase. It's also common for narratives like this to build emotional intensity by mixing personal struggle, inherited wisdom, and urgent promises. That combination makes the message feel powerful and immediate, especially when someone is already under financial stress. But urgency doesn't make a claim accurate, and emotional impact doesn't replace evidence. In practical terms, financial change tends to come from repeatable factors: skill building, consistent effort, better financial decisions, improved discipline, and learning how to recognize and act on real opportunities. Even mindset shifts only matter insofar as they influence behavior, what you do differently tomorrow compared to today. So instead of looking for a single word or ritual that bypasses reality, the more reliable path is understanding the systems you're operating in: how you earn, how you spend, how you think under pressure, and how you respond to opportunity. Those are the levers that actually move outcomes over time. You're essentially operating from the wrong internal state. Money, whether you see it spiritually or practically, tends to follow direction, focus, and mindset. When your attention is locked into stress, scarcity, and constant worry about not having enough, your actions and decisions naturally reflect that pressure. And that's what keeps you stuck in the same cycle, no matter how much effort you put in. There's a concept often explained in spiritual language that says everything has a kind of frequency, meaning the state you're in influences what you notice, how you act, and what you attract into your life. If your inner state is rooted in lack, you tend to make choices from fear, and fear rarely leads to expansion. But when that inner state shifts toward calm, trust, and openness, something changes in how you move through life. You start noticing opportunities you previously ignored. You communicate differently. You take different actions. It's like tuning a radio that was stuck on static. Suddenly you're picking up a clearer signal that was always there in the background. People often describe moments where a simple shift in mindset or focus leads to unexpected changes in their circumstances. They feel more alert, more open, and more capable of recognizing opportunities. It's not magic. It's a change in perception and behavior that follows a change in inner state. There is an ancient Hebrew concept drawn from the book of Exodus, connected to the moment when Moses asks for the name of the divine presence speaking to him. The response is understood as a sacred expression tied to provision, sustaining life, and ongoing support of creation itself. In mystical interpretation, it is associated with the idea of continuous flow and sustenance. The word is formed from 3 Hebrew letters, Yod, He, and Vav. In certain teachings, each letter is seen symbolically. One represents intention or source, Another represents openness or receiving, and the third represents expression or manifestation in the physical world. When combined, they form a sound often spoken as Yehovah. Some interpret it as a reminder of alignment, source, flow, and expression working together. In that sense, speaking it is less about the word itself and more about what the mind and heart are focused on while speaking it. Because the real shift doesn't come from sound alone. It comes from awareness. If a person repeats something mechanically without meaning, it's just noise. But when attention, imagination, and emotion are involved, the mind enters a more focused and intentional state. And that state is what influences behavior and perception. That's why visualization is often included in these teachings. For example, imagining abundance as a flowing current or light is a way to train the mind to focus on possibility instead of limitation. When someone consistently visualizes openness and opportunity, they begin to act in ways that align with that inner picture. So the emphasis is not just on repeating a word, but on the internal alignment behind it, what you are thinking, feeling, and expecting in the moment you say it. In that framework, Yehovah is treated as a symbolic expression of alignment, awareness of source, openness to receive, and willingness to act in the physical world. And when people describe changes after practices like this, it is often tied to shifts in mindset, confidence, and attention, rather than any instant external force. When your internal state changes, your decisions follow, and over time, your external reality can begin to reflect that shift as well. You're describing something as a guaranteed spiritual mechanism, but that framing is exactly where things start to drift away from how reality actually works. There is no verified evidence in psychology, economics, history, or religious scholarship that repeating any specific word, Hebrew or otherwise, can reliably produce financial outcomes within a fixed time frame, like 24 or 48 hours. Claims like that sound precise and powerful, but precision in language is not the same thing as truth in practice. What is actually true is that structured rituals like the one you're describing can have a strong psychological effect on a person's internal state. When someone follows a detailed routine, controlled breathing, focused visualization, repetition of phrases, intentional reflection, it can significantly calm the nervous system. It reduces anxiety, slows down impulsive thinking, and creates a temporary sense of clarity and control, especially for someone who has been feeling overwhelmed or financially stressed. That shift in emotional and mental state is not meaningless. In fact, it can be very important. When a person becomes calmer and more focused, their behavior often changes in subtle but real ways. They may become more observant of their environment. They may communicate with more confidence. They may stop avoiding certain tasks, or finally follow through on actions they had been postponing. They may notice opportunities they previously ignored simply because their mind was too stressed or distracted to see them clearly. But the important distinction here is this: a change in mindset is not the same thing as an external force directly generating money. The leap from "I feel focused and aligned after a ritual" to "money will arrive from unknown or automatic sources within 48 hours" is not supported by psychology, finance, or any established religious interpretation. In real life, income does not respond to symbolic actions. It responds to a combination of skill, timing, demand, environment, relationships, and repeated decisions made over time. Another important point is how language is used in these kinds of teachings. Sacred terms, mystical framing, ancient references, and precise numerical claims create a strong emotional atmosphere. This is a very common storytelling technique. It increases engagement and makes the message feel urgent, meaningful, and personally directed at the listener. Especially for someone who is already stressed about money, this kind of framing can feel extremely compelling. But emotional intensity should not be confused with factual accuracy. Something can feel powerful and still not be objectively true. Even the elements within the practice itself, breathing exercises, visualization, gratitude statements, repetition of affirmations, are not inherently harmful or misleading when understood in the right context. In fact, many of these techniques are studied in psychology and behavioral science. Visualization is often used in performance training. Gratitude practices are linked to improved emotional regulation. Focused breathing can reduce stress and improve attention. These are real tools that can help stabilize a person mentally. The problem arises when these tools are presented as shortcuts that bypass real-world cause and effect. When people are told that internal exercises alone can directly trigger external financial results without action, systems, or time, it creates unrealistic expectations. And when those expectations are not met, it can lead to frustration, self-blame, or even deeper feelings of failure, despite the fact that the underlying promise was never grounded in reality to begin with. Financial change, when it genuinely happens in people's lives, is almost always the result of compounding factors. These include improving a skill that has real market value, consistently showing up for work or business activities, reducing unnecessary financial leakage, building trust and relationships with others, and developing the ability to recognize and act on real opportunities when they appear. None of these things produce instant results, but they do produce stable and repeatable outcomes over time. It's also important to address the fear-based framing that sometimes appears in these teachings, such as warnings that something could backfire or that negative energy or skeptics could block results. These ideas tend to increase anxiety and create psychological dependence on the ritual itself. In practical terms, there is no external force preventing someone from improving their financial situation in that way. What usually holds people back is not invisible interference, but internal and external factors like lack of direction, inconsistent habits, limited skills, emotional stress, or unclear planning. If you remove all the spiritual and mystical framing, what you are left with is essentially a guided mental exercise: breathing to regulate the body, visualization to shape attention, repetition to reinforce focus, and gratitude to shift emotional tone. As a mental and emotional practice, that can be useful. It can help someone feel more stable, more intentional, and less reactive. But it should be understood clearly for what it is: a mindset and focus tool, not a mechanism that directly generates money or alters external reality on its own. A healthier and more realistic way to view this is to separate internal and external work. Internal practices can help you become calmer, clearer, and more focused. External actions, learning, working, building, networking, saving, and improving decisions are what actually produce financial outcomes. When those two work together, a person often feels more capable and acts more effectively, but one cannot replace the other. So the key correction here is not to dismiss the value of mindset work entirely, but to remove the false expectation attached to it. You can use visualization and reflection as support tools, but your financial reality will still be shaped by what you consistently do in the real world over time. If anything, the most empowering takeaway is this: you don't need a secret word or hidden mechanism. You need clarity about what actually influences your situation, patience with the process, and consistency in the actions that build stability. That combination may not sound mystical, but it is what actually produces lasting change in people's lives. Over the years, I've shared this teaching with thousands of people from completely different walks of life, each carrying their own level of hope, doubt, and emotional weight. Some came in highly skeptical, questioning everything from the start. Others were at a point of emotional exhaustion where they felt like they had already tried everything and had nothing left to lose. And then there were those who were already deeply immersed in spiritual study, familiar with symbolic language and ancient frameworks, and who understood the teaching more as metaphor than literal instruction. Despite these differences, many people described a similar subjective experience after engaging with the practice sincerely, a noticeable shift in their internal state. They reported feeling more grounded, less mentally chaotic, and more attentive to their surroundings. Their thoughts felt less scattered, their emotional reactions felt less overwhelming. And as a result, their attention began to move differently through their daily life. This shift in attention is important because attention is one of the primary filters through which human beings experience opportunity. When someone is stressed, anxious, or mentally overloaded, their awareness narrows. They tend to focus only on immediate problems, fears, and limitations. But when that internal pressure reduces, even slightly, their awareness expands again. They start noticing conversations more clearly, remembering tasks they had forgotten, and seeing possibilities they previously dismissed without thinking. I remember one woman in Miami who came to me during a very difficult period in her life. She was facing eviction, had no financial safety net, and was trying to support her children under significant stress. In situations like that, people are often not just dealing with financial pressure, but also emotional exhaustion, fear of instability, and a constant sense of urgency that makes clear thinking harder. I guided her through a simple, structured routine designed to help her slow her thoughts at night, reflect briefly on her situation, and set a calm intention before sleep. What happened afterward, from her perspective, felt like a sudden breakthrough. Within a relatively short period, she received overdue financial support that she had not been actively expecting anymore. From her point of view, it felt like the timing was extraordinary, almost like a shift occurred at exactly the right moment. From a broader perspective, situations like this often involve delayed processes resolving, prior obligations being fulfilled, or external systems finally catching up to long-standing issues. When those things converge, the outcome can feel sudden, even though the underlying causes were already in motion. I also recall a man in New York who had been unemployed for several months and was approaching a point of discouragement. Long periods of job searching can be psychologically draining, especially when effort does not immediately translate into results. After adopting a structured nightly routine focused on calming the mind, organizing his thoughts, and visualizing future stability in a general sense, he later received a job opportunity tied to an application he had submitted much earlier in the year. The offer included financial terms that significantly improved his immediate situation. From the outside, this kind of moment can easily be interpreted as a sudden turnaround or unexpected breakthrough. But in reality, outcomes like this usually involve a combination of prior effort, timing, persistence, and existing systems finally producing a result. Job applications, professional networks, and hiring processes often operate on delayed timelines. Opportunities are frequently in motion long before they become visible to the person receiving them. When attention and mindset shift, people often become more responsive to these openings, which increases the likelihood of recognizing and acting on them when they appear. Stories like these tend to be remembered as sudden transformations because human memory naturally highlights turning points while compressing the long chain of smaller contributing factors. We remember the moment something changed, but we rarely see all the background elements that made that moment possible. What matters most in understanding these experiences is not the idea of a hidden word, secret frequency, or external force that directly controls outcomes. Rather, it is the psychological and behavioral shift that occurs when someone moves from a state of anxiety, uncertainty, and overwhelm into a state of relative clarity, intention, and emotional steadiness. That internal shift does not magically produce external money on its own, but it does influence how a person thinks, decides, and behaves. And those behavioral changes matter. When people feel less mentally overwhelmed, they are more likely to follow through on tasks they previously avoided. They are more likely to communicate clearly, to revisit opportunities they had abandoned, or to take practical steps they had been postponing. Over time, these small changes in behavior can compound into meaningful differences in outcome. If you are hearing this because you feel stuck financially, that experience is more common than it often appears. Many people go through periods where they feel trapped in cycles of stress, uncertainty, and repeated setbacks. In those moments, it is natural to search for a single explanation or a single solution that can quickly reverse everything. The desire for a fast and complete shift is understandable, especially when pressure is high. However, financial stability in real life tends to develop through accumulation rather than sudden transformation. It is built through consistent patterns of behavior, repeated over time. Developing useful skills, maintaining steady effort, managing spending more intentionally, improving decision-making under pressure, and learning to recognize and act on real opportunities when they appear. None of these elements create instant results on their own, but together they form the foundation of sustainable change. Simple mental routines, such as slowing your thoughts before sleep, reflecting briefly on goals, and imagining better possible outcomes, can be helpful tools for emotional regulation and focus. Gratitude practices can also support mental stability by shifting attention away from constant stress. But these tools are most effective when they support action, not when they replace it. The important distinction here is between internal experience and external outcome. Internal practices can influence how you feel, how clearly you think, and how you respond to situations. External outcomes, especially financial ones, are shaped by a broader set of real-world conditions, including skills, timing, effort, opportunity, and environment. Confusing the two can lead to unrealistic expectations about what mindset alone can accomplish. It is also important to be cautious about ideas that suggest guaranteed results, fixed timeframes, or fear-based consequences, such as blocking energy or negative forces interfering. These concepts often increase anxiety and can create dependence on specific rituals as if they were the only factor controlling outcomes. In practical terms, there is no evidence that external forces operate in that way. What usually creates stagnation is not invisible interference, but a combination of uncertainty, lack of direction, inconsistent habits, and limited access to effective strategies. If you remove the symbolic language and mystical framing, what remains is essentially a structured psychological exercise, controlled breathing to calm the nervous system, visualization to focus attention, repetition to reinforce intention, and reflection to organize thoughts. As a mental framework, this can be valuable. It can help someone become more centered and more deliberate in how they approach their life. But it is important to treat it accurately for what it is. It is not a mechanism that directly generates money or bypasses real-world processes. It is a tool that can support mindset, which in turn can influence behavior, which over time can influence outcomes indirectly. A more grounded and ultimately more empowering perspective is to separate inner work from outer work. Inner practices can help you become calmer, clearer, and more focused. Outer actions, such as learning, working, building, networking, applying, saving, and improving decisions, are what directly shape financial reality. When both are aligned, a person is often in a better position to recognize opportunities and act on them effectively. In conclusion, the real transformation people often attribute to rituals, words, or spiritual shortcuts is not caused by any single external mechanism, but by a deeper internal shift. When a person moves from anxiety into clarity, from emotional overwhelm into calm focus, their perception changes, and when perception changes, behavior naturally follows. What feels like sudden miracles in financial or life situations is usually the result of timing, prior effort, and opportunities that were already in motion, finally being noticed and acted upon. The real turning point is not an external force intervening overnight, but a human being becoming more present, more aware, and more willing to take action they were previously avoiding. There is no proven shortcut that replaces skill, consistency, discipline, and time. Financial stability and meaningful change are built gradually through repeated decisions, learning, working, adjusting, and improving in small but steady ways. These small actions compound into real results far more reliably than any single ritual or moment of belief. At the same time, practices like reflection, visualization, and gratitude are not meaningless. When used correctly, they can support mental clarity, reduce stress, and help people regain focus. And that shift in mindset can absolutely improve how someone responds to life's opportunities. But they work as support tools, not substitutes, for real-world action. The most important truth is this: change does not come from waiting for something external to unlock your life. It comes from what you consistently do while your mindset is shifting. Inner calm helps you see better. Clear thinking helps you choose better. Consistent action is what ultimately changes your circumstances. So instead of searching for a secret word or instant solution, the real path forward is simpler and more grounded. Build clarity, strengthen your habits, and stay consistent long enough for your efforts to compound. That is where real transformation actually happens.